This is great. I've chaired a few of these industry conferences from time to time, and I've got to say this is very, very refreshing to be here. I'm independent director of the Community Energy Network, and thanks to the board, the fellow board members, and particularly for Gareth for giving me the opportunity, and your dad, of course. He writes all your papers, I believe, now. That's good. I wonder why they were so good. It actually is.
Responsibility.
It's a great honour. I'm really pleased to be able to be on the board at CN. Well, you can tell by sort of what all you guys do who are members. It's stunning when Samaria talks about it. I can't remember the numbers exactly because I can't remember 5 minutes ago at my age. So 20 million, delivering 120 million. That's the sort of stuff that thinking for MB and even for the government and everything. That's the stuff it's about. It's about strategically driving these things through. So then I'm really pleased to be part of it. It's something that I've sort of done most of my life, worked in that area from when I was a young engineer a long time ago. But just before we start, I'd like to give you one bit of an insight that just struck me before when I was sitting here. I mentioned my age, and one thing is interesting. When you get somebody that's over 55 and you throw them in a beanbag, you know what happens? They just can't get out. They're stuck in there. They've got all these years of experience, they've got everything, but they just flail around and they can't get out of there. Throw a 5-year-old on one, no experience at all. Guess what happens?
They bounce out.
And how did they do it? Why did they do that? And somehow I got the impression today that it's an old energy industry. Well, comparatively old. There's some older ones, but generally, 130, 150 years old. It's a relatively mature industry, and yet it's going to have to go through this change, and it's got to think. So it's failing. It's flailing around. It's changing. How do we do this? It's got many arms and it's moving around. And you guys are like the 5-year-olds. Because what you're doing is you're finding ways through, you're on the beanbags, and guess what? You roll over, you find the path of least resistance, the stuff that's going to help you to move, you land on your knees, and you stand up. But the old industry finds it really difficult to find that path through. So I think that's what this session is about, really, just trying to, and it doesn't mean that the people that are on the panel, that Keith's going to flail around on a beanbag. It means he's not. He's actually out and he's driving. It doesn't matter about your age, doesn't matter about your gender. So, I think that's really what we've got to try and tease out. How can we actually make this all work? So, I'm going to, what I'll do is I'm going to introduce each of the panel members so you know who everybody is. Karen Sherry was going to be here, but unfortunately she was unwell, so couldn't come, so we hope that she gets better soon. So we went to the transfer market, and we got Alan Jenkins. So Alan's a bit of a veteran player, but he's still got a bit of power left somewhere along there. He likes playing centre forward, so he's chief executives. He's chief executive of the Energy Trust of New Zealand, and also he's previously, I think, we were chief executive of the Energy Networks Association for quite a while. And he's also taken senior roles at the Ministry of Energy. And he's closely involved in the, this is something you probably want to keep secret, closely involved in the establishment of the LPG industry. That's the dark side now. And then we've got Keith Scoles. He's the owner and principal consultant in Powerit Forward. He's had very senior technical management experience. It's from Timaru, but he's got a lot of experience in the electricity industry, particularly with renewable generation in hydro and solar fields. And he's delivered projects on the ground. I hope this was you in LinkedIn. Keith, does this sound like you? I got this from LinkedIn. You look like you. But usually what happens if I can't find a bio, I just make it up.
We'll just laugh.
You laugh. I've done that at conferences before. I've made up bios where people don't pretend not to like them. It's about people who have committed crimes in the US and things. Anyway, they were on the ground in Afghanistan, you've been? Indonesia, Kiribati, Cook Islands, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Tuvalu. So you got around a bit. Yeah, well, that's good. And he's established Powerit Forward, which he's going to talk to us about a little bit now. So, again, he's a 5-year-old and a beanbag, which is great. Robyn Holdaway. So I did a bit of research about you, Robyn. So you're Group Manager of Public Policy at Vector, and you're also the advisor to the Regional Commissioner in Auckland for the Ministry of Social Development and Communications.
No, that's out of date. I
Is
just
it?
sent through a
You
bio.
not updated your LinkedIn page.
That's just my former experience, though.
Oh, well, that's what, anyway, so you formerly were the advisor of the Regional Commissioner. So I suppose, and formerly Communications and Engagement Officer in the United Nations. Are you still on?
No, I'm not still there.
Oh,
Someone got a beanbag for Bill Hinch?
Do I have bios?
I never had it. No, sorry. I find now, the strange thing is every time I bend down, there's a noise in it. Robyn says that, this you did say in the page, says that your focus is on energy future systems and public policy response.
Correct.
Energy future, and which is an experience in advising on economic, social policy, service delivery strategy, and you've worked on a range of government and non-government clients.
Yeah, that's right.
As a policy consultant, and you've also had roles at MBA New Zealand Power.
Yeah, that's correct.
Great, good.
Yes.
And John Campbell, most of you will know John. Anybody doesn't? All right, we'll skip. No, well, founder
There's lots of people here I don't know, so that's
everybody knows you, mate. He's founder and CEO of Our Energy, and his role is leading the team and designing, developing, and operating an online platform for people in communities, producing their own electricity. John is an extremely courageous young man. He's worked for the Commerce Commission and the Productivity Commission, so he was in a solid career path as through the Wellington sort of bureaucracy and working his way through. And he gave it all up. And he gave it all up because he had a dream. And that dream was to make an impact. And he had the vision of community networks using energy. We spoke to it, I don't know, about 5 years ago, I think, when I was thinking along similar lines. And John ditched his job and set up Our Energy, which I think is brilliant. It's absolutely amazing. So, well done, mate. Really. It's, I have a son that's doing similar things and he scares me. But that's great. Now, Keith's got a presentation that's going to take about 15 minutes. When you get to 15 minutes, I've got a red card. Yeah. Because I'm not a football referee. So you see the red card and you better go.
I'll steal that from you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Look, I was talking at the conference quite some time ago, and there was a couple over in the corner, and next minute this guy starts snoring, and I knew it was his wife with him, and I said to his wife, "Excuse me, lady, can you wake your husband up?" And she said to me, "You made him fall asleep, you wake him up." Power Forward, just a brief summary, is with my work in remote locations around the Pacific and around the world, I really got a passion for community and community energy. And really Power Forward is about empowering communities in the technical areas, because I realised that in New Zealand it was a situation where there wasn't necessarily the technical input that was happening into the community energy space, and that's the reason why I set up Power Forward. Previously I was engineering manager of Infotech, which is a company that's done very well in the Pacific. I was a founding staff member of that, and I left there at the end of last year to get a life and to pursue some other opportunities. This morning I wanted to talk on sea change, community energy change. And like any change, it's going to bring about a degree of turbulence and wave action. During the discussion, I want to bring about a view that could be seen by some to be poking the bear a bit, and I don't want anyone to take offence at my intent to poke the bear, and it's not to hurt the bear. The bear is the utility industry in New Zealand. And it's not necessarily reflective of utility organisations in New Zealand or the heart of utility organisations, but it's more about the environment that's involved over the last number of years. So it's time to wake the bear up. The sector is ready for a change and a complete evolution. And I say evolution because I believe in evolution rather than revolution. Revolution is just about temporary change, whereas evolution brings about permanent change. This CE space is full of opportunities for both communities and utilities, if the utilities want to play ball. This is much about a community future as a utility future. New Zealand electricity demand is due to increase to double by 2050, and we need to pull together towards a greener future. And that can only be done by every party playing their part. That's community energy and utilities. In addition, as part of that change, it's time, and it's arguably overdue, that players in the industry come to the party to address energy hardship and recognise that community energy can be an important cornerstone in that relationship. We need utilities to stop looking at community energy and say, those guys don't know what they're doing. And we also need community energy to stop looking at utilities and saying they're ripping us off. Each party has a good part to play in the equation moving forward into the future, and I guess that's what Power Forward is about. It's about weaving that road between the two parties and trying to bring the parties together to talk more about our energy future and meeting our green targets. So what do you prefer, new energy or old energy? We all know the story of Kodak, or those of us that are old enough know the story of Kodak. Where Kodak failed was they failed to recognise that the digitalisation of photography would change the face of photography. And it was that socialisation of photography that changed the direction in the industry, and Kodak weren't aware of it. And I think in the energy industry we've got the same thing beginning to happen. There is a sea change coming that will change the face of energy, and we all need to be on board with what that means. And due to cost and availability of energy, that's going to change the nature of the environment we're working in. So excuse those from the utility if I talk about some of the troubles that utilities face, and you may or may not agree, but this is my view. We have disengaged customers. We have 30 plus distribution companies in New Zealand. To me, that doesn't make sense in a company, in a country the size of New Zealand, when we've got the likes of the UK that has 6 distribution companies. Networks would have been built different if solar and storage was available at the time. It has its inefficiencies. The current model is not entirely a commercial model, as it's based on regulated return. You essentially get regulated return for what you build. And a degree of over-design is required for future capacity. Excuse me, I lost my idea. So, community energy isn't new. In fact, it was only in the 1990s that some of the change was brought about. The core ethos at that time was that our utilities were owned by communities. And then the government of the day decided to roll out a commercially driven market-led model, which we see dominating our energy sector. While the reason for change was real, there were parts of the sector that did move, and there were parts of the sector that didn't. But unfortunately, one of the things I think we lost for a period of time was that sense of community. So now is the time for community energy. Affordable and dependable technology now allows communities to turn away from utilities and take control of their energy future. And I'm not saying that they will turn away from utilities, but I'm saying there is the opportunity for that if utilities don't take their part in the community space. And some of them are trying that, and some of them, unfortunately, are not proving to be open to that future. So here goes some of the reasons why there's going to be change. The business case is now really strong. As you'll see, PV prices have dropped over the last 10 years, and they look like they're going to continue to drop. And battery costs are also, so they're about 20% of the costs that they were 10 years ago. That's quite a significant change, and they'll continue to come down. The natural progression of falling prices is there's more opportunity for other parties to participate in the energy scene. And utility and community energy can recognise their place in that. So the time is right for a change, and a change in social focus can refresh the energy industry and promote new ways of thinking. And energy hardship affects communities and can't continue to be ignored. In time, consumers will want to take back the power in the utility space if they don't feel they're being served well. Communities, social enterprise and corporates can benefit what each other bring to the table, but they need to sit together and find solutions to difficult problems. From there, it's about prioritising key outcomes and objectives and generally moving them toward them rather than just talking at things like this and then going home and forgetting about it. To tackle energy hardship, there's a need to aim at the heart of communities, and unless you're regularly working with communities, the right emphasis can't be there. I recall a few years ago I went to a conference and a utility was talking about engaging with energy hardship. They surveyed 50 customers and that was their engagement in energy hardship. That's not engagement, that's just skimming the surface. Energy hardship and the associated health and wellbeing issues can't continue to be ignored or considered a consumer problem. Here goes some things that I've observed, and the things, the reasons why your lines company may not choose to help. They're too busy. They're unsure how it will affect them. The too busy perspective. Utilities need to consider this is not a business as usual model, but it's actually a completely new model to grapple with. And I think a lot of utilities are getting it lost and they're trying to deal with it as their business as usual equation. And I don't think that's necessarily doing it the service that it is needed longer term. And just a word of warning for those who are looking for legislative change. Legislative change without collaboration is like being in the middle of an auditorium, putting a piece of paper on the floor, saying this is the way out in emergency, and there being a fire and everybody scatters but nobody knows where they're going if there's no arrows on it. And the arrows are the way we collaborate together in the industry. And that has to happen from both a utility and a community perspective. Some of the utilities are unsure of the technical benefits and value that can be derived from distributed energy and storage. And with new technology, and I'm not talking about new technology for the utilities themselves, I'm talking about distributed energy technology. Apart from a few companies in New Zealand that are working, who have worked in that space overseas, there is a lot of experience lacking in utilities with respect to the experience of where distributed energy and storage can fit in the equation. There's a need to move from traditional mindsets, and this is what Bill talked about is that some of the traditional mindsets are kind of stuck, and there's a need for utilities to encourage that shift within their senior people within their organisation to actually engage and to see the future in a different way. And I believe that shift can happen. So how to bring about your renewable energy project? Where to from here? First of all, community energy enterprises need a coordinated and consistent approach to influence change. We can't actually wait for utilities to come on the journey with us. We need to find some way to move ahead if they're not going to engage. But if they're willing to engage, then good on them. And there are a number of people in the utility space that are beginning to engage with the community. But there are other ones that are just refusing to acknowledge the change. Utilities can be part of the equation, and we need a few, as we've talked about before and earlier commentary, is we need some exemplar projects to drive forward a future. It can no longer be engineering egos that drive our utility mindsets. We need to appreciate that a lack of vision for community-related outcomes is no longer sustainable, and we need to move to steadying and guiding hands into our future. This is just a brief thing on delivery of these projects. It's got Powerit up there, but it doesn't matter who it is. These are some of the things that are needed to deliver some of these projects. And as you'll see, there's quite a considerable amount of things to be thinking about in the equation to deliver these projects. And this is what Powerit is here for, to help bring some perspective to how you bring this together. You may not go through all those steps depending on what type of project you're implementing, but certainly these are some of the things to be thinking about longer term. So, in summary, looking at the left and the right hand side of the equation, what do we want? Do we want new energy or old energy? We must act, we must dream, we must plan, but we must believe in a different future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And you finished within your allotted time, so that was brilliant. A lot of things in there, a lot of good points that you want to talk about, maybe some that you want to talk about and challenge, and prod and see what else comes out. I'll just ask, we've got the question on here which is about the panel's view on who's going to drive distributed energy's role, and I think it should be really around community energy role in New Zealand's energy transmission. This morning, quite a few of the presentations talked about that, so what's the role of the councils? What's the role of regional governments? What's the role of central government? What's the role of communities? Because, is there a new model that's forming for communities? So I think, first of all, I'll go to Alan at the end, and then ask Robyn, and then thanks for talking, comes to John.
Well, let me begin with a 2-minute history lesson, because community energy isn't a new thing. If you go back, well, when I joined the government back in the 1970s, It was in the process of trying to disentangle itself from the local hydro scheme of the 1960s and early 70s, which in today's terms probably sopped up about $1.5 billion of supposedly government money, although with a bit of sleight of hand it extracted it from the National Provident Fund, voluntary savings scheme. It was a disaster, but the thought was there, and the idea back then was to empower local authorities to do these things, go out and build little dams. Some of those ones in the audited, very good research paper that came out, 100 and whatever it is, 50-odd schemes around, are there. They've lasted, but at huge cost originally. Also in the 1970s was a focus on CO2 abatement. The Ministry of Energy, well, in fact it was the ministry that preceded it, was in the process of scheming for a nuclear station at Macra on the south coast of Auckland. They bought the land and sent people to America to learn how to do it. So how things change and don't change. We're also moving into another ice age back then. That was the conventional wisdom of the time. OPEC was freezing up oil supplies just to compound the situation, and panic was everywhere. Governments made big decisions. That's what Think Big came out of that sort of environment. Anyway, coming right forward, I'd like to talk quickly about the enabling policies we need. If we're going to move anywhere with this sort of grassroots, grassroots approach, we really need some sort of lead, as people have been saying. As it is, the government, mainly through disengagement, has let this, what we once Keith, commercially driven, market-led model be it. Electricity and energy generally has become a bit too complex for governments. They've left that to policy advisors who seem to be pretty well disempowered in the current world, and also to regulators who are pretty powerful but are not policy animals. And so you just go down the list of things that seem to be in the way of going forward. And in that sense, I'm talking especially for electricity distributors and the trusts that own a lot of them. They sit there and they want a reasonable commercial model. They don't want to sit there and say that we've gone the way of the 1960s and built white elephants that cost a fortune. So they look at things that will give them investment confidence, and particularly they look at government policies. We look what we've got. We've got a transmission pricing arrangement which gives the remote generators, the mainstream players, a free ride through the grid. They don't pay anything apart from their connection charge at the top end. They get their energy to the market that will be competing with your new community energy venture. Instead, the local distributor has to pay that bill and pass it through to you, because you can do that with monopolies. So just like that, there's a great big front-end gain, at 10% on average price advantage. And it also gives them a lot of other powers which are associated with control of that grid load. Then alongside that, we've got a thing called nodal pricing. Very confusing. Around the country, 140, 150 odd exit nodes for the mainstream generators' electricity to come out of the grid. And at those points, there is a nodal price, and that sets the local price, which is typically quite a bit higher than the injection price, because it reflects the losses and constraints along the grid. As the grid gets highly loaded, the losses go up exponentially because they go up with the square of the load, if you're a mathematician, at the distance. So what that means is you just knock a little bit of that load off and the price collapses. And so if you're an investor, you say, oh, we've got 14% advantage in Northland if we build a local generator. So you start generating, you just generate a little bit and the price collapses from the grid-based generators. And so that sort of thing is another hidden barrier to you. It's put about. I mean, people explain this with a wave of the hand. Oh, that's a locational signal. Well, it's a nonsense, obviously, that evaporates when you respond to it. We've got Section 54Q of the Commerce Act, where the Commerce Commission is instructed. It's got two musts in it. It must provide incentives for energy efficiency and demand-side management. It's be-all to all those. It's been there since, what, 2008. Very little's happened. The incentives are seen as a disruption to market forces, that free market we talk about. We might get a few poster campaigns out of it, that's about all. And yet, the Commission has sat by quite idly while the Electricity Authority has been abolishing ACOT, the avoided cost of transmission. ACOT has its faults, but basically it is the one incentive of that type that's out there. What it does is say, if you have managed to avoid some transmission costs through local initiatives, you can capture that, or the local distributor can capture that and pass it through in prices. That is seen as an aberration to that free market approach. And so it's gone. I'm not quite sure where it's got to. I would have thought the Commerce Commission would say, just a minute, 54Q. How can you possibly get away with this? Not a breath out of them. If you or I tried to do something like that, we'd be up for collusive pricing or something. What else have we got on the list?
Not very much.
Okay.
No, carry on.
Especially the Electricity Authority, on distributors using a monopoly position to keep others out of schemes like yours. Well, that's what the Commerce Act's for. You look like people abusing a monopoly power. You've got a regulator with enormous powers. They're also very well informed about the electricity division. They regulate it, the electricity distribution company. And on top of that, simply the trust-owned companies have no incentive to rip off their own people. They're there to serve them, not to price gouge them. So I'll leave you on that point.
Thanks, Alan. The question was about who are going to be the movers and shakers.
All right, that's all right. So Robyn's going to answer that one for us.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, thanks, Alan. Yeah, so I guess I see that distributed energy is going to both enable and be driven by a much wider involvement of a wider range of participants, and that is a really positive and exciting thing in terms of unlocking new demand, unlocking new value from the demand side of our electricity supply chain, actually increasing competition by creating a new downward pressure in the wholesale market, as well as increasing customer choice. And I actually think that there's an increasing role for network businesses to both provide platforms which enable the integration of solar and battery systems, which is actually critical for their secure integration, as well as leveraging distributed energy systems potentially directly on citizens' behalf to offset demand, to optimise network businesses, and to benefit all customers on the network, not just those who have chosen either individually or collectively to invest in their own solar and battery systems. And so networks actually have a potentially really powerful role to play in terms of delivering equitable benefits on behalf of their customer owners, as Alan pointed out. However, I think that there are some energy businesses through the supply chain that really need to change the way that they see themselves. So they need to change the way that they see themselves from being the stewards of large assets, which is a very passive role of recovering the cost of heavy infrastructure from customers over generations, to actually taking a much more active role in terms of managing that demand. And I think similarly, I completely agree with you, Alan, there's a role for regulators to change the way that they see themselves. Similarly, from acting as stewards of a market which was designed decades ago to actually enablers of future-ready infrastructure. I think no decision maker can afford to take a set and forget approach to our future energy market to enable affordable electrification of transport and process heat, or to increase renewable generation. To achieve these goals, we really need to open our markets up to new players, and we need to flip it on its head to start with demand. Because actually, at the end of the day, customers do not exist to passively pay for infrastructure over decades. Infrastructure exists to serve them. And I think from a regulatory point of view, this is really about moving from a siloed view of the market, which sees, to Alan's point about some of the regulatory restrictions that are on utility businesses, that actually inhibits the extent to which network businesses can invest in connected renewable generation. It's about moving from that silo view of the market towards a whole systems approach. And it's about working in partnership with industry. And it's about starting with the customer.
And John, you're one of the new play, well, you're not that new now, in 5 years, so, what's your impression? Who do you think are going to be the movers and shakers as well, and also, how have you managed it?
Yeah, what Robyn said really. Probably can't add a lot more to that. But yeah, I was actually just looking in the break before. It's 5 years yesterday that our energy was registered at the company's office. So, there we go. Look, the short answer to this is everyone that wants to be a part of this transition will be, and those that don't, they'll get bypassed. I honestly think it's as simple as that. And equally, what that means, and there's been a lot of that theme discussed this morning, is that collaboration is crucial. There is a bit of a, and I think this goes to some of the point perhaps Alan was mentioning earlier about, I think one of the things that's been created out of the current market design is this idea that communities sit on one side and the commercial aspect of the industry sits on the other. Actually we've got to be thinking more systems and how those interact with each other.
Yeah. That is an interesting concept that I think you're both talking about is, okay, just peel away the structure of the current structure of the industry, just peel it away, almost clean drawing board and say, okay, so let's start off with something new. And you're saying, right, let's take a systems approach. So strips out the ownership and you're working your way through all of that. What do you think will come out of that? What sort of structures do you think might work? Who will be the players in that sort of supply industry?
Well, I can say what I certainly hope it looks like. So I really hope that it looks like an energy system which is basically driven by optimization rather than consumption. And I think what that looks like is a completely different supply chain. So rather than starting with a centralized source of supply, and then you pay all this money to get it from one side of the country to the other, we're looking at a greater role for distributed, distributed energy systems. And that will be, in an ideal world, supported by actually a range of demand-side solutions and energy efficiency solutions like demand response markets. And what that really relies on is a pivot away from mature to immature technologies. And so to get this right, we need to be proactive. So that's about implementing the right distributed energy resource management systems now, like Vector's distributed energy resource management system, which we co-developed with a software firm. It's about moving early on cybersecurity as our digital surface area increases. So it's about developing those platforms. I think optimization is actually also about scale. So it's about asking, where is it most efficient to have single residential distributed energy systems? Where is it more efficient to have larger scale systems? MB's report on the economics of utility scale solar has actually found that there are some parts of the country where it doesn't make economic sense to invest in very large scale solar because of the grid upgrade that is required. Equally, there are cases where if you have multiple residential systems, you end up with a duplication of infrastructure, so that's not always efficient either. So I think there's a real role for community scale and network scale solar to add a lot of value in the market. But I think ultimately what this future looks like, it's up to us. It's about the choices that we make today.
I guess the way I look at it is there's a need for a move away from considering utilities considering themselves just asset owners. It's really about enabling, and that's some of the stuff that Robyn's talked about. It's enabling that energy transfer, and how that energy transfer occurs. Maybe they need to be a little bit agnostic to that, and that will facilitate, in its own way, that will facilitate the best outcomes. I must commend Vector, because they're sitting out there as an organisation that's actually trying to lead the charge with some of the changes in the industry. And there are a few distributors, but 30 distributors is a lot to shift in the industry. As far as the community energy side of things, we do need a community energy champion within the industry. For instance, why shouldn't part of the EA levy that we pay, why shouldn't that be apportioned across to support community energy rather than going into the big regulator funding stream? And so part of this equation is about smarter thinking about how we're doing things, and there are various enablers within the industry that are achieving that, but we've still got a long way to go.
I'll just take up Keith's point on the 30 or 39 distributors to begin with. Scandinavia has far more per head than we do, and it is a champion of community energy, so I don't see it as one of the advantages. On top of that, though, I think we're at a cusp or nexus point right now. We've got an interministerial panel looking at a number of climate change enabling, RMA fixing, and energy response things. It's got Megan Woods representing energy, David Harker, and Minister of Climate Change, which I know all have forgotten. All there looking at these things, and this is a wonderful moment, I think, in that sense. We might just get there here and some sort of action. At a decent level, we don't want the usual, here are some minor subsidies for EVs and some bits and pieces around the place. We really need a hard look at those policies I mentioned. And so, wonderful time, and a wonderful time for you people to really be pushing your message.
John?
Yeah, I'll just add to what Alan was saying. I think the critical barrier that I see here is, is the market rules and the way it's formed. The period we're in right now, and this probably echoes a bit of what you were saying earlier, Keith, is, I see we're in the energy space, we're in this time of, moving from horse and cart to cars. Yeah? And that's actually how we need to think about it. There are road rules to be developed, and if we get that right, the technology, the investment, the innovation, the well-being, all the things we want and need, the reduced emissions, that will happen. But we've got to get the market settings right. I can go into specifics if you'd like, but perhaps that's another question.
Yeah, well, it could be, because, as an observer, I'm thinking of our two officials from the ECA and MB that were here before, and I sort of get the impression that...
That's still good.
Yeah, no, I get
just in case you're
So our officials, very well dressed. And spoken. But I got the sense that you guys are looking for a sleek greyhound, and actually they're dealing with a hedgehog. That's really just how I'd sort of see it in my mind. Because they've got all of these different problems to do, and it's, there's this, we can't do this because it's in front of this, then there's the policy that gets in the way. We've got some calendar that we're working to, and then we've got budget limitations, and we've got all of that sort of stuff, and yet we've got children that are in energy poverty, we've got houses that aren't insulated, they're freezing cold in the winter. Crying out loud, let's get the hedgehog out of the way, and let's get this greyhound going. So what's the thing, one for each of you, that you think must happen? Because I think I can see myself what must happen, but what do you think must happen? What's the one thing that would actually drive this change through faster, that our officials could take back to Wellington to give to one of the ministers or all of them, presumably?
Yeah, sure. For me, and this, from my own company's point of view and self-interest, there's one rule. It's really around unlocking sort of the shackles that tie consumers to one supplier. That's based on a model of centralised generation, delivering to consumers.
Right, so how's that going to help me as a 5-year-old freezing and bedding through winter?
Well, you're actually moving from, I think what that regulatory change would enable is actually moving players in the market from seeing themselves as suppliers to providers of services. And, you know, the service is a warm and healthy home, yeah? It's actually not kilowatts, you know, despite what we like to tell people in the industry. It's being able to cook my dinner at home at night, being able to wake up in the morning and my electric vehicle is charged. That's the service, yeah?
Yeah.
It's not, I'm a Genesis customer, and if you switch away from me before 2 years is up, I'll charge you $200.
So removing the barriers so you can get service focused.
Correct. Yep, and if you do that, innovators will provide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, John, that we're going to see that transition from a commodity-based model towards a service-based model, and that's a really exciting thing for customers as well as for our decarbonisation journey. In terms of that one thing to bring back to Wellington, I'd pick up on Alan's point around regulation, and this is a recommendation that Vector has been lobbying for, and that is for regulators to take account of decarbonisation. And it sounds like a really basic thing to be recommending, but actually it is something that has received, you know, some kickback from across the industry. It's something that the UK regulator has already done. But it's so important to have that alignment between policy goals and regulation, and we can see that from the case of Australia, where around 23% of households have, you know, solar and battery systems, which is the result of some policy level subsidies that they have. But actually what's happening is they've seen a reduction in reliability, and in some cases they're experiencing curtailment, which is basically just wasted renewable energy because the networks can't deal with bidirectional flows of power. And that's because networks, and this has been found by work that the Australian Renewable Energy Association has commissioned into the maturity of distributed energy resource integration. Basically, this is because there's a lack of coordination and visibility, and that is largely determined by those regulatory settings. And so that's why it's actually so important, that we have that policy, that alignment of regulation with policies. Just sort of bringing it back to your focus on energy hardship. Again, this is where I think overall system optimization is so important, because the benefits are felt by all customers on the network, not just those who have chosen to make that investment in solar and battery systems. And this is where networks that are majority owned by customers can, I think, play a really powerful role. What we have actually found at Vector is that higher income households have experienced the benefits of energy efficiency at a rate that's 4 times faster than lower income households. And we worked that out basically by overlaying publicly provided data, like socioeconomic data, over energy consumption per square metre of housing. But this, to me, it's sort of similar to findings that has come out of the London School of Economics by Professor Martin Cave, where he talks about a 2-tier energy market, and that's about switching. So basically, higher income households in the UK tend to switch more, they get better deals. Lower income households switch less, and so they actually end up paying more for the same power. And so what this tells me is that if you're relying, whilst energy efficiency and behavioural change has a role to play, if you're relying on customer behaviours and the uptake of energy efficiency technologies, to alleviate energy hardship, it's just going to result in some cases in inequity. And so we, rather than starting with the customer and say, what can you change? We need to be looking through our whole supply chain and our energy system and say, where can we squeeze out more value for our customers? Where can we optimise for them? And so, that's about shifting from that consumption to optimisation.
Yeah, really interesting. Both of you then. So talking about service-based stuff, and then that optimization. So
I've got another one if you...
good. So I'm just thinking, it takes me to this. I just remember it my calendar. It was a few years ago. We were talking about how could you actually sell electricity, not as electricity in kilowatt hours, but actually in terms of a warm home and a warm bedroom and those sort of things. So could a utility actually step beyond this technical sort of barrier that it has at the meter and actually get beyond that and say, well, no, actually, we'll just provide you with this warm home. And, it was also around, well, could you actually sell it when you sell a refrigerator to somebody? You sell them the energy with it, and so whoever was selling it would be encouraged then to actually be selling an efficient refrigerator. It's just turning the whole sort of process on its head. I think it's really valuable, the sort of things that we're bringing out. So you did want another one then?
Yeah, the other one that I think New Zealand needs to grapple with is the gentailer model, and actually ask itself whether that's appropriate for the world we're moving into. I think it made sense when we were setting up the market 20-25 years ago, to seed the market, to put volume in the market, to get it going. I'm not convinced that that's the case, much longer, if at all, now.
Well, all things must change. Alan, we were thinking when we put the market in place, it was the greatest innovation since Thomas Edison. So, it was quite different to the model that was there before. But maybe it has done its day. What do you think?
Yep, I couldn't agree more. The only small quibble I have there on that one, John, is I don't think it was a good idea right from the beginning.
I was trying to be, a little bit middle ground, but if you're going to encourage me there, Alan, I'll go there as well.
I think to me, it's time for some sort of cataclysmic reform where we go away from the old top-down model where everything was done to bring power to the people from the top end by the government, and to a bottom-up one. We've got to face the reality that soon, if not now, we're going to have that sort of market and world where you're facilitated to put your solar panels on your home, to do a community generation set and so forth. You are not impeded by the system. So someone's got to turn around and rip the rule book up and start again pretty soon, and why not now?
You in that sort of area as well, Peter?
Yeah, look, I'm fully on board with John. I think the model that we had that might have been okay for an inception 25 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it may be, lost track of time now, it might have been appropriate for them, but I do think it needs another good look at, and certainly the removal of barriers. And look, some of the simple barriers that we deal with, and I don't want to be too pointed here, but some utilities won't even engage on community energy, and that's a real concern. That you can send them information, request information, and they won't engage. Now, if that's going on in the industry, that's a real concern, and it needs to be somehow addressed, whether we have an ombudsman to deal with that sort of thing, or we have an organisation that's recognised there as part of the equation to support the energy scene in whatever form it needs to be to support communities in the future. So I think there's certainly a lot of barriers and a lot of changes that need to occur, but I'm not negative about the future. I think we've got a positive and we've got an exciting future, and we've just got to get it geared right.
Yeah, so we've got the cataclysmic versus really on the clean sheet and start again, versus converting the thing to drive the sort of stuff that we want in place. So we've got Robyn's sort of service-based pricing stuff, which everybody, does everybody agree on that? That would be a good thing. Anybody not agree? You can disagree, but I'll ask you to tell me why you disagree. I normally speak, I always pick on people, so I watch that one, you may ask you questions. No? Yeah?
I suppose I'm not an expert in this area, but
and everybody at home can hear you?
Not an expert in this area at all by any means, but I suppose to get to the point where people understand, like someone was saying before, you know, you can offer all these great things. There's a group of people in the community that will not take it up. We give free insulation. Some houses you can't get through the door with free insulation, even though they're cold and damp. So it's a great idea about service delivery. Again, it comes back to cost, and so you've got to get real efficiencies in there, as well as just saying, you know, to go and say, oh, we'll give a warmer home. There's so much around that. Then is that power company also supplying insulation and a whole lot of other things, moisture barrier and everything else that goes with it. So yeah, the idea of people being able to choose services, but there's a hell of a lot of education that needs to go to people in a different way than we imagine education. It's a completely different education tool than most of us in the room are aware of, you know. And so, good theory, but that group that seem to be missing out will continue to miss out without understanding them. You know, I don't think we do that very well.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yes, I would like the panel to go in a bit more depth into who is going to tear up the rule book and with what resources. I think the theme of the day so far has been around the idea that proponents of community energy are quite innovative. They want change, they want innovation. We've also heard that at least one of the distributors is keen on innovation as well, namely Vector. I can tell you of at least one other that is not, and I suspect there are others like it. So yet we have a situation where the interests around community energy are resource scarce. They have very little money, yet the incumbents, those who would probably like to hold the horses back, even though they're not extremely wealthy, they have far more resources. So there's a resource imbalance which is against the process of innovation, and it's against the process of tearing up the rule book. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah, they're two really good points. So really, I suppose it's the complexity, you know, where the rule book adds the complexity and places barriers in place.
Well, it's just that we don't have a level playing field. We have a so-called market in the sector, and I think that's been a nonsense from the start, actually. It's a contrived computer program. But we see it as an open market. But now we have a market for ideas. We have a market for innovation. And it's very severely skewed to the point where I would think the innovation probably won't happen at anything like the speed that we'd like to see it.
Right. So, John.
So yeah, I mean, look, I don't know how that happens, but what I will say is the work exists. Scott here is on IPAC. The work that needs to be done is sitting there about how you get more participation into our energy markets. The ENA has done work on this.
No, just to make a real fine point, how are we going to get resources into the hands of the people who've got the ideas and the motivation?
So this is exactly, yeah, I go from the other side. If we get the rules and the market settings right, the money and capital will flow and get that happening. I totally concur with your point that, you know, it is a bit of a contrived market. It's supply, you know, any good market that we all experience every day has a strong demand and supply side. The electricity market is one-sided on the supply side, yeah? If we get the rules right to get demand side participation in there, and this is what is happening overseas. Yeah, we're not trying to dream up anything actually all that new. It's happening in the UK with flexibility markets. It's happening in Australia, as we heard today, with other types of market innovations. It's actually not rocket science, you know, and IPAC have got work. The work is sitting there. It just needs to be prioritised and done. And yeah, Sandpit set up to do it.
Would that deliver what you were talking about, Robyn? Got a completely new system.
Look, I don't disagree with what you've said, John, and I, completely agree with what you're saying, that our market is currently unbalanced. There's a lot of value that can be unlocked at the demand side that we're not currently. Just to address the question that was asked, this might sound, no, you're fine. This might sound a bit ironic because the objective that we're talking about, the future that we're talking about, is really a bottom-up future. But I actually think that to make the changes that we need, it is going to require some top-down leadership. And so another recommendation that we've been lobbying for is actually for a Ministry for Energy. And that's to bring together at the right level that right kind of policy thinking that can drive that regulatory change and those market settings that we're all talking about. Because at the end of the day, the regulator can only act within their legislative remit. And so we need to see that, that leadership and that will for transformation at the right level. That's my view.
Yeah, I think one of the things that often goes through my mind, and it's not right and it's not wrong, but one of the things I do often ask myself is on some of these groups that we've got at the EA level, is there the right level of engagement with the right sort of people who actually understand potentially what the future can look like, and I don't know the answer to that, but I can only speak from experience that a couple of years ago I approached one of these groups about being part of them, and they said no, we're only looking at executive level people to be participating in these groups. Now I think that's wrong. I think one of the things that our industry has lost, while we've got some engineers that have an embedded mindset, we've actually got some smart engineers and versatile engineers within the industry that could also provide a feed into those organisations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be executive level people all the time that provide the feed into those organisations. And I think that's a significant change in the way we view some of these groups at the Electricity Authority level and various other levels.
Just before you do, Alan, just thinking about it, because you've got a lot of interest with trust, with the distribution of trust, community trust, and this is a really good question about resources. So we know there's a lot of resources locked up in the 29, 30 distributors, and others, and the communities don't have those resources. Arguably, they used to do in the 1930s when there was the electric power sort of boards set up around those, and the power boards and all of those. So they did have some resources then, but now communities tend not to do, but they do have ownership through the community trust. So is there a way to release some of those resources and persuade distributors to help the community projects?
Yes, there is a great willingness to do things in the community in most of the distribution companies when they can see a commercial case. As I was saying before, the numbers tend to not stack up, so they don't push hard unless they've got other reasons for doing it. I would think a bit of a lead from government would be great at mobilising some of this. A government policy statement on community energy and distribution generally, all bound together, as has been mooted, would be a great move, but again, it's a bit of paper. The big thing is to capture people's hearts and minds, and I think to do that, you really need to have some sort of focus. I love that idea of a new Ministry of Energy. Hides my civil service career, general manager.
I've got the job.
But I'm available. But something at the top. I know the EMB people do their best, but it is a great big fragmented mess as a department. It's got so many different irons on the fire. Something that actually understands the electricity industry, is not reliant on the regulators who are not policy people, and develops these things as, all importantly, as a communication channel for us. So one of the great failings of the Ministry of Energy in that spirit, it tried, it got people like Molly Mellish and so forth into a little advisory group and so forth, but all they really did was pick holes in ministerial statements. It didn't really sit the minister down with the advisors or the chief executives even down. It was just a token. So cleaning that up would be the way forward too, something that's a consultative new look in this direction.
But just before we go on, sorry.
But I'm really saying that we've got a whole load of community trusts that own those assets and they own those resources. Granted, there's a governance issue between the owners and the businesses themselves, but they're holding a trust for them. Is there not a pathway through for the trust to start to change the statement of corporate intent of some of these businesses, the distributors, to release the resources to the communities? That's really the simple question. Do you think there is?
Sure, I'm sorry Karen isn't here because she was very much into this very thing. We'd like to in fact have a session on this in May at one of our two conferences, 8 trustees. There's a strong drive by the ETNZ, that's Trust Association Executive, to try and create some sort of centralised, coordinated push within the trusts industry to do just these sorts of things. There's a strong sense that some people aren't well informed, others are just inherently suspicious, and a lot of them get negative feedback from their companies. It's a tradition really for the chief executive of the company to advise his board, don't listen to them, what they know. We're the experts, we're engineers. And whereas the trust is there trying to say, look, we're trying to express the will of the community. What's best for our consumers, not what's best for the company's business case necessarily. And it's an interesting sort of dialogue between the two. And something that just gives coherence to that and brings the best brains in the trusts industry together would be great.
Yeah, I'd probably be a little bit blunt here. I'm not quite convinced that at our trust level there is sometimes the engagement from the directors of these boards that there needs to be. A lot of them are community representatives that don't necessarily have business skills, and they come into these organisations and then try and figure out a complex industry or an industry that's got more complex over the years. And some of that mix of people at that board level are not right. I do agree totally that the boards of the trust do have the opportunity to drive a different direction and a different ethos for their organisations. Their heart originally when they were set up was for community. My view is they simply need to get back to that and figure out what that equation is around the community and the engagement with their community, because some of them just simply don't engage with their communities, and I think that's really important moving forward. As we're finding post-COVID, that there's a whole social arena that we've forgotten about over the years that we need to bring back into a wide variety of our operations, and this is commercial versus social balance. The only other thing that I drop into the equation is, we have 30, and I know you mentioned before about the 30 plus, but we have 30 boards across the country, in excess of probably $30 million that's been spent extra in the industry on those boards. Is that good use of funds? I'm just not so sure.
Yeah, good point. Any questions? How long we got left? We've got 10 minutes. So 10 minutes of questions for our panel on what we've been talking about and how the industry can change. Whoever the industry is. You're the industry now, aren't you? The new industry. Yes, Scott.
So fascinating discussion, and thank you. And I'm going to duck down under the iPad because I can't talk about that stuff. It's sort of. But one of the big things.
Well, it's all public on the EA's website.
Yeah, that's right. So all of that.
Scott's not hiding anything. If anyone wants to look up what I was talking about, it's all public.
So there was a really good point earlier about ensuring that policy is in line with decarbonisation goals. And I guess my question or idea is that we have accepted, all of government has accepted that we need to decarbonise. We have a national goal and we have city goals that are setting even tighter decarbonisation schedules. What that hasn't done is feed through into the various regulatory bodies here. That hasn't fed through into the way we operate. So what will it take what agencies need to be pushing, and do we need to maybe reinvent? Do we need some cataclysmic change? Do we need to do away with at least one of those organisations and create something new? If we are to meet our decarbonisation goals, because let's face it, the transition we have is going to be monumental change for New Zealand. Yeah. And if we keep on chipping away at the little bits and pieces, there's no polite way of saying what will resolve.
Nothing.
We have a civilisational crisis confronting us, and if we don't decarbonise, we aren't a good place.
Yeah.
So what's the where are the who are the bits and pieces that you would like to attack?
Good question, Scott. Who wants to answer that one first?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the importance of community energy. Yeah, I mean, to me, decarbonisation as a word, as a thing, means something probably to people in this room, most of us. It's the average person doesn't really, I think that decarbonisation is a hard thing to get your head around, and what do I do as an individual in my house, in my community to decarbonise? Community energy gives us that vehicle. It's something you can attach to locally. So I think that's one of the things, and it's a logic for supporting community energy is providing that ability for people to engage in a way that makes sense to them.
Robyn?
Thank you for your question. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge, the amazing work that does go on in a lot of these different government departments, ECA, the Energy Markets team at MB, Ministry of Transport, and now the Infrastructure Commission, which I think is doing an amazing job of starting to pull together that 30-year infrastructure strategy. So there's a lot of great work that's happening in the public sector. Just from my perspective, I guess it's just about providing that right sort of alignment. And your question was specifically, what agencies need to come together. And I guess for me, I can see each of those agencies that I just mentioned do have a role in driving our transition to a low emissions energy future. So for me, that would stick out as, that there's a lot of value to be added from, coordination between those agencies. And I know that that's already, happening. I guess it's also recognising that when it comes to the regulator actually taking account of decarbonisation and its objective, you're not going to have all parts of industry asking for that. What we've experienced is actually pushback against that. There's a view that actually if the regulator was to start thinking about decarbonisation rather than just competition or productivity, which are really important objectives, but they're important insofar as they serve customers. And actually they go hand in hand with decarbonisation is my view. But we've actually experienced quite a bit of pushback against that. So just once again, it does need that kind of top-down leadership, and coordination can support that.
I have a question from the internet.
Oh, yes? From the internet?
From the internet, yes. We have about 20 people watching, which is pretty exciting. All right, so question for the panel. Are the Lines Company's CPP the last convulsions of a dying service industry?
Right. Do you want to answer that, Robyn? Who wants to go first?
So I wonder if the question is talking about the price quality framework.
Thanks. Customised price pack. Was it?
Yeah.
CPP. No, C.
A CPP. So you can have a GPP, a CPP, or an IPP.
Oh my God.
But I guess for me, when it comes to price quality regulation, really aligning with decarbonisation and what the customer of the future needs, it's about incentivising and enabling the right investment to be made at the right time. And that's about sort of shifting away from just incentivising investments in traditional heavy infrastructure and CapEx, and actually looking to integrate and leverage smarter solutions. It's about sort of moving from brawn to brain, if you like. And a lot of those software-based solutions that enable the sustainable integration of distributed energy services are actually OPEX. And so we've kind of got this price quality framework that was designed, literally decades ago to incentivize a particular type of investment. And I think we do need to seriously look at that and, and ask, is it actually incentivizing and enabling network businesses to be making future-ready investments? My view is that that framework could be changed.
Yeah, can I add to that and just say, from direct experience, that has happened to us, our energy over the years of our life, that a network business will actually come up with the justification to not work with us because they can't capitalise the cost of our services. So it's a real thing.
Okay. Alan, have you anything to add?
Oh, I can add a very little bit. I think CPP, there was a question, customised price path is a sort of, rather than a one-size-fits-all price control regime where Commerce Commission inflicts on distributors, you can break away and have a customised price path just for you. And the four that have done it are Orion in Christchurch, understandably after the earthquake, they couldn't survive without or rebuild without a special price regime. Two foreign-owned ones, that's Powerco and Wellington Electricity. Powerco's owned by Australians mainly, Wellington Electricity by Chinese. Both applied for it because arguably they didn't see the ability to fund their planned expansions of their revenue internally, possibly linked to the high interest rates they're paying offshore. And then most recently, Aurora, the City Council owned one down in Dunedin, who underinvested for a long time, as I understand it, and have to have a catch-up. It's comforting to see no trust-owned companies in that list. It wouldn't surprise me if one of the small ones ended up leading one, because some of those little trusts had no real urban centre to fund the huge rural networks they have to support. But so far, trusts have been able to be pretty sensible with their investments.
Yeah, it's probably because quite a few of the trusts are outside of the arrangement, so there's incentive within. But you're right. It's an interesting question because you've got we got a regulator that's regulating the monopolies, the monopoly line companies, for the protection of consumers. So it's a price quality regime. So they cap the price that the distributor can charge at something that's going to give them a reasonable return, and also monitor the quality. So it's pretty straightforward, basic sort of regulation that's happened all around the world. But the world's sort of changed to incentive-based stuff now, and I know the Commerce Commission's looking at a lot of that sort of thing. But it's whether that regime is actually supportive of community energy networks and the development of communities more. And it's something that really does need to be thought about. It's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you. Just an observation from today. It's great to come along today and to hear the panellists in the front. One of the observations I've made, as I'm sure a number of us have, is that people like Vector, from the discussion you've had today, Robyn, seem to be very motivated to play a part in this future, and I've followed Vector for a number of years in terms of the investments they've made and various things. It seems to me that Vector could play a reasonable part in an organisation like this with the work that you're already doing, and obviously with some of the ideas that people have got. If they I think what I'm trying to highlight is that I can see Vector playing a part in this organisation, and it'd be great if there was some desire to do so. That's my comment, I guess.
Yeah.
One distributor sort. 29 to go.
I'm sure Robyn wouldn't be able to say yes just today, but we can talk it through and see. We're about coming up for time, aren't we? So actually, it's not bad. Well done. We got there. But really interesting session. I'm still, I think what we've got is there's still a bit of a range of views that are coming out here from the, plain you absolutely wipe the slate clean and start off with something new from electricity markets right the way down and all that.
that had me, it does make me scratch my head and say, well, do you need that to create the customer energy networks? And I think, John, you were in that, you were saying, well, maybe just a tweak around, or a kick up the backside, basically, for the IPEG and get it through, what's going on, why are you taking so long? Say for you guys at the back, does it need to be a head job? Is it not just a few things that we can do that's going to drive it? I know life's complicated, but hey, getting consumers involved in energy sort of things shouldn't be that difficult. It just needs some basic structures. To me, everything that we talked about this afternoon, and actually all through today, could sit within a reasonably simple strategic framework. So I just wonder, because I usually think this way as well, as Gareth will tell you, put it against a strategic framework. And to me, we really need to get a clear perspective on what we are talking about when we're talking about community energy networks. That can be quite different. It can move, but really get an idea on what the sort of core of that is, because we're talking about, it'll be like a mini energy company. They'll be trading with each other, like John's model, really, and quite a few others that are around. Or it could be something quite different to that. It could be something that the community is sort of linking into energy waste systems as well, and turning them into bioenergies. So it could be involved in newer technologies, and so. We need to think what's within this, the envelope that we're talking about. And I know a lot of our discussions are about energy hardship and that sort of stuff. So the critical thing, I think for CNN is, for CNN is that the less well off in New Zealand aren't prevented from getting access to the benefits of community energy networks and new technologies and those sort of things. So, to me, it's time for a really good strategic thinking about what does all this include, what can be moved now, and it's really like the force field stuff. What are the driving forces of change? When we talk about, the children, the poverty, and the this and the that, and then it's new technologies, and we've got environment, and we've got, so expand all of that, so they're the driving forces. And then what are the opposing forces? What's preventing it? And there's the hedgehog in government, and there's structural things. There's old guys like Alan, and me that are sort of, we've got a head fixed in the past, and we're trying to keep up with you guys now before we were doing the running. So that's great, because sometimes it's good to look back at the past. But I think from one thing for this workshop, it would be really good to have a really clear, high-level strategic plan about what this all means. And then when you get the driving and opposing forces, it's actually back to government and saying, well, this comes down to policy. So you don't want government to do a whole load of stuff. You want government to set a policy framework that everybody can work within. And I think that's what it comes down to in the end. So on that note, I got the last point. I got the last chance. I'll just tell you one thing before I do that. When I was about 20, as a young engineer, the commercial manager in Manchester came running into the office after going off to a conference, nothing like this, I suppose, probably a bit bigger one around Manchester. And he said, we can pack it out, you've not got a future in engineering, Bill, in here, because it was a power company, the lines and everything. I've just heard about a black box that will sit inside a house, and it will produce all the electricity they'll ever need. It will produce water, fresh water, and it'll produce oxygen. And that's all you're ever going to need. Anybody know what it was?
Hydrogen.
It's the fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell. So that was way back in the mid-1970s, and we haven't got there yet. So to me, what we've got to think about as well in all of this is, we talk about solar, we talk about that. I'll tell you, there are there's billions of dollars now going into investment. Climate change is going to drive huge changes in technology over the next decade. Massive changes. Nuclear fusion, I was talking to where's she from Greenpeace, these things are coming along. Hydrogen is going to be driving this, and there's going to be big opportunities for consumer energy networks because they're going to be micro. Britain's into micro-nuclear power stations now, but they'll get into fusion and that sort of thing. So things are going to change rapidly. So whatever we come up with has got to also be resilient to those changes. So anyway, that's the end of our panel session. Hope you thank them for that.
Thank you, Alan, especially for stepping in the last one, and now you're going to lead a new energy ministry. So. I didn't think he was going to volunteer to lead a new ministry, but we could just tick off a bunch of other jobs as we're in our party. So we're moving to the very last segment of the day. So there is tea at the back, but as I said at the beginning, what I'd like us to do now is use our tea break, and around your tables you have some white paper in the middle and some markers. So this is where we start to do that strategic planning session. So I've taken some of the chat board questions up there, and we'll read some of them in the discussion. But essentially what we want to do is take about 20 to 25 minutes to really get into a discussion with those at your table. And some of the questions that were just raised here, really important ones, are how we're framing this. So at the beginning, what important energy transition needs can community energy contribute to? Before you get to answer that, you need to define what it is at your table. And we've heard a few different ways of thinking about what is community energy. You can think about it in terms of legal, cooperatives or nonprofits, or anything to do with local investment, right? There are different legal structures, different types of communities who might participate. So have that chat around your table. What is community energy and what do you think it can contribute to? Given the discussions we've talked about today, what are the biggest gaps in developing the sector in New Zealand? So what is it, what are the gaps, and what kinds of policies, strategies, and partnerships can play a role? We've got hints of this all through the day, but let's debate it a little bit right now, right? So that for the next 20 to 25 minutes, then we'll come back and talk about it as a group. And as I said, we're going to be collating and recording these responses so we can have something to share with each other moving forward. I also wanted to say, I think Bill has really helped me with my new essay title, which is "It has to integrate beanbags and hedgehogs." Barriers for the energy transition or something like that. That is just really brilliant. So have a stretch. I know it's been a long day. Get some more coffee and some food, chat around your table, and you'll hear from me in about 20 minutes.
That was really good, guys. Well done.
Oh, thank When I was typing on my so I'm writing notes for high-level stuff in a way that hopefully they don't understand. So that's what I'm trying to do. And if I don't do it while I'm actually I find it translation too hard after the event. Not everyone agrees and not everyone it makes a big
The exact opposite.
Okay, everyone, that's our 25 minutes.
Why it's out.
Wonderful. We have one group already to present.
Community.
You have to start on your face. You're going to have to make it up.
So that's one of the gaps, isn't
Right here behind you. Have a seat, please.
Community needs is not aligned.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic over. Just a reminder, our question. What is community energy? What are some of the gaps, barriers, and what's our strategy forward?
I think it's
sort of an investment of time.
Okay, kia ora koutou. The southern team is up first. You've got pretty easy answers. The first one is accessibility. And
I'm going to say that.
Sorry, I want to sort of the accessibility for the first question. It's about the accessibility to information and also the accessibility to funding. Because I believe that that's the most important thing when we start to build the community energy. Yeah.
thank you. And the second one is education, which I think that's come through pretty strong this morning, hopefully. And the next one is RJ. So RJ is
is exactly what Robyn and John said. And if they'd like to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So accessibility, education, and RJ, which I think we can thank you for clarity. Now, which table wants to go second? What you guys? Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. I'll just start off with the first question there. What needs can community energy contribute? So I guess one of the ideas would be being able to provide affordable energy sustainably. Also, we've got the possibility of education and advice roles in terms of looking at how we use energy in our own homes and things like that. Also, we can possibly encourage people to push government a little bit more for change. Because when government gets the message that the community wants to change, it hopefully will act and at least start to move in the right direction. So, yeah. Just looking at gaps, access to capital, big thumbs up for Ministry for Energy. We've got an energy minister, but no ministry as I understand it, or something like that. Lines companies, I've got here, buy in and support community energy. And also an observation that community needs are not necessarily aligned with what is offered by the market or industry. So, yeah, that was just where we got to there.
Wonderful, thank you.